Let's bring in Chloe Demrovsky. She is the president and CEO of Disaster Recovery Institute International. She's very familiar with the underlying issues the industry faces. And Chloe, let's start right there. Lots of people scratching their heads. How do you get $700 million in federal bailout money and then 3 years later saying you're broke?
Well, Del, you have to go back in time to 2020 and think about what kind of a situation we were in back then. Everybody was at home. Everybody was getting everything shipped and delivered to their door, and shipping and freight were just completely under everybody's scrutiny at the time. We were all totally reliant on them. And so at that time, the administration was making the call that if they were to lose any trucking capacity whatsoever, it would be a major issue, potentially a health issue, a national security issue. I mean, it was really a huge problem. I mean, it was only just recently that we actually finally unstuck the ports because there was so much excess so many excess goods that had come over from China and that were stuck in the ports with not enough truckers to deliver them. So if you go back in time just a few years, it makes sense that they would be giving money just to kind of keep the system running, cobble it together. And in truth, Yellow's problems go back decades. It was certainly not a great investment, maybe not one that it would have been made by the federal government and by taxpayers under duress, other than under duress. But at that time, it was a national crisis.
So Chloe, who is to blame? You know, that's what the audience always wants to know. Who is the bad guy in this? Because you're right, 2021, we had those supply chain crises. We saw the ports that were just stacked with shipping containers from all over the world, massive backlogs. But that being the case, now we have UPS that has cut a deal with the Teamsters Union. But we also have Amazon, which is a massive shipping company. We have FedEx, massive shipping companies. Yellow, 99 years old. Are we looking at the tip of the iceberg, or is this just something that is just a one-off?
My sense is that it's a one-off. Here you had Yellow, which was the low-cost carrier. So they would specialize in less than truckload freight. That means less than the actual full truckload. And they were all about cutting costs as much as possible, making it as cheap as possible for people. What that meant was maybe they had some good times during the pandemic, like all trucking and shipping did. They brought in a lot of money and a lot of customers. They were moving a lot of goods then. But then now more recently, as you probably are, like we all are, spending a lot more money on services like restaurants and travel, and maybe not ordering as much stuff. It's lean times for trucking. They're not moving as many goods. Yellow, because it was so low cost, doesn't have a lot of cushion. It doesn't have a lot of margin for those downtimes. And then on top of their large debt burden that they've been carrying and that they brought, I mean, this debt burden goes back to like 2003 when they first acquired Roadway. They never fully merged their operations, which meant they were carrying a lot of extra cost. Then they head into the financial crisis of 2007, 2008 with all that extra cost, and they just never caught up from there. So it's been a long time coming with Yellow, but it still has a lot of impact, especially on the drivers, the people who were working for them every day, for whom this was their life and their livelihood for a lot of years. I
was going to get to that point because one of the packages that we had on the air quoted a gentleman who said he had been with Yellow for 30 years and he found out that his pension was gone. How does that happen?
That's right. So they were trying to back out of some of their benefits payments more recently, and that started or exacerbated a fight with the Teamsters Union, which was fighting back on behalf of workers and saying that it was management's fault. Management was, of course, saying that the union labor, that the Teamsters were being unreasonable in their demands. So it's a little bit of a question of he said, she said. Now, hopefully, as the assets are being sold off in bankruptcy, there are some good assets there. Certainly there's real estate, there's trucks, there's lots of properties that will be able to be sold, and hopefully those individuals will be made whole. I know that the Teamsters Union is also trying to find jobs for those 30,000-ish jobs that have been lost during this time, and that's going to be difficult, but certainly we do need workers in general. It's maybe fewer workers in trucking than we needed a few years ago, but it's still the largest layoff like this since Boeing in 2020. I mean, it's a sizable number of jobs, and these are good middle-class jobs, so yeah, it's a tough blow.
I want to take a deeper dive into what you just said. Yellow, as you said, negotiating with the Teamsters Union for months prior to bankruptcy. The company is blaming the union, saying it was irreparable harm in its efforts to modernize, but I do want you to hear what the employee had to say. Take a listen.
They wouldn't pay the bill, so we was going to go out on strike. We give them another 30 days to try to get their stuff together, and they forfeited. Of course, they're trying to sue the union, which is a joke.
So that being said, you said that the Teamsters is trying to find these workers jobs. If you've had 30 years of driving a truck and you thought you were going to be able to retire, guess what you don't have? 30 more years to figure out what to do with your life. So how do they make ends meet between now and then? How bad is the situation for the guy that's behind the wheel or girl?
It's tough, honestly, for people who are that far into it, who've been counting on a specific type of retirement that they've put their life and their livelihood into. It's not going to be easy. And, you know, these are some traditionally good middle-class jobs that came up with unions, that came up through the industrialization of America. I mean, you keep in mind that Yellow was a 99-year-old company. Back in those days, trucking was highly regulated, highly unionized. Starting in the 80s, it started to be deregulated, and a lot of their competitors are non-union. So they just were trying to do it in a way that is sort of old-fashioned in a lot of ways and isn't in keeping with the modern economy. So when you have something like trucking, which is really a legacy industry, it's very traditional, and then you have these companies facing a lot of driverless trucks, possibly decarbonization woes. I mean, it's a lot of pressure on trucking to be able to change, and also on truckers as individuals. So it's a lot to ask for individuals, and I feel for them, I really do.
Chloe, I grew up in the Ohio Valley, and I remember when steel was king and the coal mines were open, and then one by one the mills shut down. But it was not just the mills and the mines that were affected, it was the entire livelihood of my hometown. Is the same thing going to happen in places that had these massive hubs where Yellow Trucking operated out of?
You know, it's funny you were saying that. I spent a few years of my childhood in Ohio, and there was a Yellow facility just down the road from me. So I've been thinking a lot about that too. But trucking is more spread out. It's a web, it's a network, it's more diversified. It's not like you have a trucking dependent town in the same way that you would have a coal town or steel mill town. There is also a lot that is happening in this sector. It's very dynamic. It's just that Yellow was not a particularly well-run company. There's a lot going on when we're nearshoring, we're friendshoring. You hear a lot about the decoupling with China, trying to make things in America or make things in nearer countries. Mexico is now our single largest trading partner. And how do goods get from Mexico to their end consumers in the United States? Trucking. So there are a lot of opportunities. There's just a lot of shift. And whenever shift happens, I mean, you can look at the statistics and the averages, and maybe it's a win overall for the U.S. economy, but with any change, there are individual impacts that are going to affect people. And so that's why it's really, really critical for everyone, to the extent that they can, to build up a reserve of resilience, personal, professional, and for companies to build in that slack and that resilience as well, so that they can continue during hard times.
Chloe, 30,000 people right now wondering whether or not they're going to be able to make ends meet. Should the government be looking at, I guess, a bailout for the worker, since they already bailed out the company?
Well, the idea of those bailouts during the COVID days were, of course, to bail out the companies so that they would keep people on their payrolls, so that they would continue to employ people, so that the economy could bounce back more quickly from the shock, because workers wouldn't have been displaced. They still had that relationship with their employer. And that was the sort of general thinking. And we have seen a pretty sharp comeback from the COVID-19 pandemic. But certainly this is what, government support programs are for. This is what unions are for, to protect the worker. And we have to continue to do that.
Chloe Demrovsky from, I'm sure, the Valley as well. Chloe, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure.